Each and every one of you has the power to make an unimaginable impact on multiple lives with just a conversation. My hero did. And this is our story. I'm going to tell you about the conversation that saved my life. But I should probably first tell you why my life needed saving in the first place. Standing before you today, I hope you agree, I look pretty healthy. There's really no indication that I was ever desperately ill, or indeed, in need of a transplant. But when I was born, my parents and my doctors didn't know if I was going to make it this far, or if I'd live at all. I was small, I was desperately underweight, and I had a blue tint to my skin, which was an indication that something was likely wrong with my heart. As it turns out, I had multiple holes in my heart. I had valves in the wrong place, and I had an underdeveloped pulmonary artery, which is an important piece of the plumbing. Things didn't look good, and my parents were told there was little hope. Whereas most newborn parents are showered with gifts of blankets and adorable baby outfits, my parents received a lot of flowers. For the first 10 days of my life, I was so sick they weren't allowed to hold me. And when they held me at 10 days old, it was because I was about to go into my first surgery, and the doctors knew it might be my parents' only chance. Obviously, it wasn't. I had a minor surgery at 10 days old and another minor surgery at 10 months. But these were all temporary solutions. In the long term, I was going to need major corrective surgery. So when I was 4 years old, I underwent open heart surgery, and my heart was essentially reconstructed. During that operation, I received a very precious gift, a donor pulmonary artery, a heart valve transplant, the donated tissue that would make that surgery and all of my subsequent years a success. From that moment forward, I was able to grow and thrive. I attended school, I got good grades, I played sports, though never very well, but that wasn't because of my heart. I also participated in drama, in student government, in speaking events. I was a normal, albeit geeky, kid. It was a while, however, before I was old enough to really understand what I had been through, and more importantly, what I had received. See, growing up, I heard my parents tell my story, and I eventually got old enough to understand what had been wrong with my heart, how it had been fixed, and the fact that my future will likely involve another surgery. But growing up, the focus was always on my heart health in general, and I didn't really realize I'd received a transplant until my speech coach encouraged me to do a talk on organ and tissue donation. And I started advocating for organ, eye, and tissue donation. And when I did, people started asking me about my donor, who they were, what I knew about them. And back then, I had to tell people, I know nothing. My parents and I, we didn't know anything about my donor or my donor family. And I would tell people, I don't know my donor's name or age or gender. I don't know their occupation, where they lived, or what their hobbies were. I felt like I knew nothing, and yet I did know something. What I eventually started telling people was this: all I know is that my donor had a strong, loving heart. They must have. Because my donor decided to give a complete stranger the most precious gift of all, life. And I also knew that my donor must have had a loving family who in their darkest moment thought of others and gave my family hope when they were scared and uncertain. These were my first reflections on my donor and donor family, more than 10 years ago now. And at that time, I honestly thought I would never know anything about my donor or my donor family. I didn't think I could. And I didn't think I'd ever learn about the conversation that saved my life. But somewhere along the way, I found out it was possible for a transplant recipient and a donor family to correspond through the proper channels, and even on a rare occasion, to meet. Now, when I first learned that, I was so emotional, I couldn't even think about it. It took me years to build up the strength to even consider writing a letter to my donor family. And then it took me several years to figure out how I go about doing that. But over that time, I had a growing desire to say thank you. I just wanted my donor family to know that I was out there, that I was thinking of them, and that I was grateful. And I wanted them to know how much their loved one was loved by me. So eventually I found my way to CryoLife, the tissue processor that had prepared my heart valve for transplant. And they told me some good news. They said, yes, we can find your donor family. And they invited me to write a letter and send it through their organization. Now, per privacy laws, information on both sides is kept confidential. But the details I was permitted to know immediately about my donor included my donor's age and gender. And it was shocking to be told. Your donor was 8 years old when he died. I spent weeks trying to process that information. Despite the fact that I'd been 4 when I received the transplant, I had never imagined my donor as a child. And the thought of writing a letter, how do you write addressing parents who have lost a child? But I still had that desire just to say thank you. So I decided to open myself up to the journey, and I prayed that this little boy's family would be okay hearing from me after such a long time. So one evening I sat down at my kitchen table and I cried a lot. And I wrote from the heart. Hello. It's hard to know where to begin. I've thought about writing this letter for a long time, but it's still hard to find the words. I want to start by saying I am so sorry for your loss. I can never imagine the pain you have felt. When I learned a few weeks ago that my donor, my hero, was only 8 years old when he died, I didn't know how to process that. For some reason, I'd always imagined my donor was older, had gotten to live more life than that. I am so sorry. And I also want to say thank you for the decision you made in that trying time. In your darkest moment, you selflessly thought of others, and that is why I am alive today. It's hard to fathom that strength and compassion and love. I am the grateful recipient of a donor heart valve from your son. He is the most influential person in my life, my angel and my hero. I filled several pages in that first letter, and then I sent it off, along with photos from throughout my life, and I was happy. I felt very content that no matter what happened, even if my donor family wasn't comfortable writing back, even if I never learned anything about my donor, at least they knew that I was out there thinking of them. A few weeks later, I received this response. And I finally met my hero. My life was saved before I was even born by Philip John P.J. Wolfe III. And if that isn't the name of an epic hero, I don't know what is. P.J. is amazing. He was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, fierce little boy. He had the spirit of an adventurer, and his soulmate was Indiana Jones. I can tell he loved his family very much, though I've been told some stories of him getting on the nerves of his 3 older sisters. Apparently, he was a little mischievous at times, and his favorite places were the school library and the playground. And he had a strong, loving heart. In this letter, I learned the first bits of information about PJ. And I also learned about the conversation that had saved my life. See, apparently there had been a story on the news about someone who needed a transplant, and that started a family conversation. The Wolf sat down and talked about what is organ donation, about the need for both adults and children, and how it works. And they also talked about living kidney donation, the fact that you have 2 kidneys, and you can donate one and live a perfectly healthy life. They had the family conversation, and PJ's mom said she went back into the kitchen, finished preparing dinner. She didn't think any more of it. Then about 20 minutes later, PJ came into the kitchen, and he asked me if it hurt to donate. I said yes, but only for a while, and the reward was the other person got to live. He looked at me and said he had thought about it, and it would be okay. He wanted to donate a kidney because he would still have one left. He said, "I only need one, Mom." That was it. In case you missed it, that was the moment that sent my life in a completely different direction. That was the conversation that saved my life. PJ's mom said she was so shocked at his sincerity of wanting to donate a kidney. It took her a minute. And then she had to tell PJ, who was only 5 or 6 at the time, that he wasn't old enough. But when he got older, if he still wanted to, of course he could donate. They moved on from the conversation and on with life. And there is a part of me that wishes his mother never had to recall having had that conversation. But PJ was struck by a car and passed away at 8.5 years old. When nothing else could be done for him in the hospital, his family knew what he wanted. He told them. When I first finished reading this letter, and my crying settled down a bit, I just stared at the photos I'd been sent, and I repeated his name over and over. I was so happy to finally know who he was. And I was amazed at what he had done. That my donor, who was only a child, the decision to save my life, it had been his. And at that point, I didn't think the journey could get any more emotional. Because it's really quite rare for recipients and donor families to correspond like this. And it's even rarer when so much time has passed, and in the case of tissue donation. But it's even rarer for the 2 sides to meet. But 6 months ago, 25 years after PJ passed away, I ran into his family's arms. Our two families rang in the new year together, celebrating life, honoring PJ, and rejoicing in the company of what we now call extended family. In spending time with PJ's family that weekend, who were so generous in sharing precious photos and memories, PJ came to life for me in a way that I will always treasure. It's been a very emotional journey to get to this point, but the point is, what started it all? The most momentous inflection point in my life took place before I was born, when PJ told his mom he liked the idea of donation and he wanted to donate a kidney. You see, donation doesn't happen because someone dies. No, organ and tissue donation really happens because someone has the courage to have that conversation, because it's discussed. And often that leads to a decision, a life-saving decision. And one of the reasons I share our story so openly, even though it's still very raw and emotional, is because these conversations don't tend to happen enough. And I understand. I mean, you can see the joy in our two families as we've united. But the reality is, it's not an easy conversation to have. And I recognize that. We don't like to think about our own mortality. And oftentimes we don't get the answers to our question or find out more information. There's a taboo around the subject. And so I understand that it's not always the easiest conversation to have. But it's also incredible that we have the opportunity to make these decisions in advance. Long before we pass away, we can decide what our last act will be on this earth. And it's also incredible the impact these conversations and decisions can have on the thousands of people who are waiting, dying for a second chance at life. But if lives like mine are going to be saved, we have to just talk about it. So today, commit to converse. That is my request of you. Talk to your family, talk to your friends, talk to your housemates, talk to the person sitting next to you. But let's talk about organ, eye, and tissue donation. Well over 25 years ago, the Wolfs talked about it. And then PJ talked about it further with his mom. And it saved my life. So my question to you all is, will you commit to doing the same? Thank you, PJ.